My name is Adela Moreno. I am 35 years old. I install and monitor home security systems for a living, and I found out my family had decided I was a thief on the day of my mother's funeral. They didn't accuse me privately. My younger sister, Renata, did it in the church hall after the burial, in front of 40 relatives holding paper plates of food nobody wanted to eat. She stood up near the coffee urn, dabbing at her eyes, and she said that she hadn't wanted to bring it up today, of all days, but that the family deserved to know the truth, that in Mama's final weeks, $31,000 had disappeared from her accounts, and that she was so sorry, but the only person with access, the only person who'd been alone with Mama and her banking, was me. The room went quiet. My aunt set down her plate. My uncle looked at the floor, and my father, my grieving, exhausted father, looked at me with an expression I had never once seen him aim at me in 35 years, and it was the expression you give a stranger who has hurt someone you love. I did not defend myself. Not there, not then. I have learned, in a career spent around people at their worst, that the person who erupts is the person everyone decides is guilty, and I was not going to hand Renata that. So I stood very still, with a paper cup of coffee going cold in my hand, and I let the accusation hang in the air, and I said only, I understand why you'd believe that. I'll prove it isn't true. And I set down the cup, and I walked out, and 40 people watched me go and decided my leaving was a confession. But my sister had made one mistake, and she made it because she had spent her whole life thinking of me as the quiet one, the invisible one, the sister who worked with wires and cameras and was too dull to be a threat. She didn't know that 8 months earlier, when Mama got frightened about her own memory, I had installed a small system in her house, and that the system had been recording the whole time, including the night the money moved. Before I tell you what was on that recording, and what my sister's face did when I finally played it, tell me what time it is where you are right now, and whether you've ever been believed guilty by the people who were supposed to know you best. I want to see how far this story travels. I have to explain what I do, because it's the whole spine of this story, and it's the exact thing my family always found too boring to respect. I work in home security. I install the systems, I monitor them, and a lot of what I actually do is help families protect vulnerable people, elderly parents, mostly. Cameras by the doors, sensors that notice when someone who usually moves at 9 a.m. hasn't moved by noon, discreet ways for an adult child 4 hours away to know their mother made it down the stairs safely. It is not glamorous work. It does not produce dinner party stories, but it is built entirely around one principle that turned out to matter more than anything else in my life, that memory is unreliable. People lie, and the only thing that holds up when everyone's version of events collides is a record that was made at the time by a device that had no stake in the outcome. My family thought this was a small job. My mother, God rest her, used to introduce me as the one who does the alarms. Renata called me the cable girl. At family gatherings, when I tried to talk about my work, someone would ask kindly whether I could get them a discount on a doorbell camera, and everyone would laugh, and I would laugh too, because that was the toll for a seat at the table. Renata was the interesting one. She did something in marketing. She was charming. She was the one who lit up a room. I was the one who checked that the room's smoke detectors worked. Renata is 3 years younger than me, and from the time we were children, our family ran on a rule no one said out loud. Renata is special, and Adela is reliable. She was the pretty one, the funny one, the one whose problems were dramas the whole family rallied around. I was the one who was fine, who was always fine, who could be counted on to handle the boring necessary things while everyone attended to Renata's latest crisis. There were 3 moments I never let myself feel until much later. When I was 12, I spent a month building a science fair project, and Renata knocked it off the table the morning it was due, and when I cried my mother comforted Renata, who was so upset she'd made a mess, while I rebuilt it alone before school. When I was 22, I paid off the last of Renata's college debt so our parents wouldn't have to, and no one ever mentioned it again, because a gift from the reliable one wasn't a story worth telling. And when our father had his heart surgery, I coordinated the care, slept in the hospital chair for 9 nights, handled the insurance and the medications, and Renata brought flowers on the last day and cried beautifully. And it was Renata everyone gathered around to comfort. Each time, I was praised for being strong, if I was mentioned at all. That was the shape of us. Renata felt things, and I handled things, and handling things made you invisible in a family that only ever turned to look at the one who was feeling. I want to be fair, because fairness is the whole point of this story. Renata was not born a villain. She had been raised to believe she was the center of every room, and no one had ever required her to be otherwise. And somewhere along the way the world revolves around me, curdled into, and I'm entitled to take what I need from the people orbiting me. She didn't experience herself as cruel. She experienced herself as a woman who deserved things, and a sister who had plenty and wouldn't miss it. My family built her, and they built me, too, built the invisible, reliable, suspiciously quiet sister who was, when the money went missing, so easy to believe the worst about. Because here is the terrible efficiency of what Renata did. She didn't just steal. She stole, and then she reached for the family's oldest story about the two of us and turned it inside out. The reliable one had access. The quiet one was alone with Mama. The dull sister who worked with money and accounts and other people's private information. Wasn't it always a little strange what she did for a living? In one move, my sister converted every quality that made me trustworthy into evidence that I was a thief. And my family, who had spent 35 years not really seeing me, found it terribly easy to believe. I found out how easy on the day we buried my mother. Let me go back 8 months, to the beginning, because you can't understand the recording without understanding why it existed. Mama started forgetting things. Small things first. A pot left on the stove. A bill paid twice. The same story told an hour apart. She was frightened, and she was proud, and she did not want to move out of the house she'd lived in for 40 years, and she especially did not want Renata to know how bad it was getting, because Mama, even at the end, was protecting Renata's image of her. So she asked me, not because she loved me more, I want to be honest, I don't think she did, but because I was the practical one, the one you asked when you needed a thing handled quietly and well. She asked me to help her stay in her home safely, and I did what I do for a living. I put in a system, cameras at the front and back doors, and in the main living areas, motion sensors, a medical alert, the works. I did it gently and respectfully, and I explained to Mama exactly what it was, and where every camera was, because I would never surveil my own mother without her knowing. She consented. She was relieved. Now if anything happens, she said, somebody will know. She meant a fall. She meant an emergency. Neither of us imagined what the cameras would actually end up witnessing. Here is the detail that matters, the one Renata didn't know. The system recorded continuously to a secure cloud account, and it kept months of footage, and the account was mine, under my company, because I administered it. Renata knew, vaguely, that I'd put in some cameras for Mama. She had no idea they were still recording. She had no idea the footage was retained, and she had certainly never once imagined that her quiet, dull, cable girl sister was, in the most literal sense, the keeper of the record of everything that happened in that house. I was at the house a lot in those last months. I helped with the banking. Yes, that part of Renata's story was true. Mama's hands shook too badly to write checks, and her memory made online banking dangerous, so I sat with her and we paid her bills together, at her kitchen table, in full view of a camera I had told her about and forgotten was there. Everything I did with my mother's money, I did beside my mother, on camera, with her watching and approving. I did not know, at the time, that I was building the most complete alibi of my life. I thought I was just helping my mother pay her electric bill. Renata came around less. She'd sweep in for an hour, be radiant and exhausting and beloved, and leave. But she came around enough, and in the last 2 months, she started coming around at odd times I wasn't there. I noticed, the way you notice things, and I didn't think much of it, because she was Mama's daughter too, and had every right to visit. I did not check the footage. Why would I? I trusted my sister the way I had always trusted my family, completely, and without ever looking. Then Mama died, and 3 days later, at the funeral, Renata told 40 relatives that I had stolen $31,000 from our dying mother. I want to describe what that accusation actually did, because people underestimate it. It was not just that Renata lied. It was that the lie fit. It slid into the slot my family had been building my whole life. Of course it was Adela. She had access. She handled the money. She was alone with Mama, and she was always so hard to read, wasn't she? So private, so quiet. Within a day, the story had hardened into fact. My aunt stopped returning my calls. A cousin I'd been close to sent me a message that just said, "How could you?" My father, this is the part that hollowed me out. My father asked me, in a voice I'd never heard from him, whether I needed help, whether I was in some kind of financial trouble, whether that was why. He wasn't asking if I did it. He'd already decided I did. He was asking why, and Renata played it perfectly. She didn't rage. She grieved. She was so sad, so betrayed, so reluctant to have said anything at all. She told everyone she didn't want to involve the police, because family is family, and she just wanted the money returned and some kind of acknowledgement. She positioned herself as the merciful one, wounded but forgiving, and me as the thief she was nobly declining to prosecute. It was, I had to admit even in my devastation, extraordinarily well done. My sister was very, very good at being the center of the story. I could have screamed the truth. I could have stood in that church hall and shouted that it was her, that she was the one who'd been coming around at odd hours, that I would never. And it would have changed nothing, because I'd have been the erupting one, the guilty-looking one, the hysterical sister making a scene at a funeral. On the emotional terrain where my family lived, Renata's tears would always beat my facts. I had learned that lesson across 35 years, and I was not going to unlearn it on the worst day of my life. So I said the only thing I said, "I understand why you'd believe that. I'll prove it isn't true." And I walked out, and I drove home, and I sat in my car in my driveway for a long time. And then I went inside, and I opened my laptop, and I logged into the security account that only I had access to, and I went back through 8 months of footage from my dead mother's house, looking for the truth about my own family. It took me 2 nights, and what I found was worse and clearer than I had let myself imagine. I want to describe those 2 nights, because they were the strangest of my life. I sat in the dark with my mother mother's kitchen on my screen, her empty chair, the table where we'd paid her bills together, and I scrubbed backward through 8 months of her last year, watching her get a little stronger the further back I went, watching her alive again in reverse. I hadn't planned to grieve while I searched, but there she was, saying yes, that one, pay that one, her hand on my arm, and I had to keep stopping to breathe. I was looking for a thief and finding my mother, over and over, and the two things happening at once nearly broke me. It was the loneliest detective work in the world, proving my own innocence by re-watching the last months of the person who would have known, without any footage at all, that I could never have done what they said. I'm not going to narrate every frame, but I'll tell you the shape of it, because the shape is the story. There I was, over and over, at Mama's kitchen table, paying her bills beside her, time-stamped, her hand on my arm, pointing at the screen, her voice, caught on the audio, saying yes, that one, pay that one. Months of it, me, doing exactly and only what I said I did, in full view, with her consent, with her participation. If anyone had ever wondered whether I'd handled my mother's money honestly, there was an 8-month, time-stamped, audio and video answer, and the answer was yes. And then there was Renata. On 5 separate occasions in the last 2 months, my sister came to the house when I wasn't there, and let herself in, and sat at Mama's computer, alone. And on 2 of those occasions, the audio caught Mama's voice, confused, tired, trusting, from the other room, saying things like, "Is that you, Misha? Are you helping me with the bank?" And Renata answering, warm as anything, "Yes, Mama, just tidying up your accounts. Go rest. Tidying up the accounts." I sat in my dark living room at 2 in the morning, and watched my sister move my dying mother's money while telling her she was tidying up, and I understood that Renata hadn't just stolen and blamed me. She had used the exact access she was accusing me of abusing, and she had done it while comforting the woman she was robbing. The $31,000 had moved in 4 transfers, and the footage lined up with the bank dates exactly. There was no ambiguity. There was no interpretation required. There was a woman at a computer, and a date, and a dollar amount, and a confused old voice in the next room being told to go rest. I sat with it for a long time, because I understood, immediately, what I was holding. I was holding the complete, unarguable truth about my sister, recorded by a system I'd installed to keep my mother safe, and I could see every possible way it could go, and I made myself think through all of them before I did anything, because I have spent my whole career around evidence, and I know that the moment you have proof is the exact moment you're most likely to use it badly. Here is what I did over the next 2 weeks, and here is what I did not do. I did not send the footage to the family group chat. I want to be clear about that, because it's what every part of me wanted to do at 2 in the morning. I did not blast it out, did not post it, did not humiliate my sister in the same public way she'd humiliated me. The temptation was enormous. I had, sitting on my laptop, the power to detonate my sister's entire life in front of the same 40 relatives who'd watched me walk out of that church hall looking guilty. I didn't do it, and I want to be honest about why, because it's not simple saintliness. Part of it was strategy. Evidence dumped in rage looks like an attack. Evidence delivered calmly looks like truth, and I wanted truth. But part of it was something harder. I kept asking myself what I actually wanted underneath the fury, and it was not to destroy Renata in a church hall. What I wanted was for my father to look at me again the way he had before. What I wanted was to not be a thief in the eyes of the people who made me. Destroying Renata publicly wouldn't give me that. It would just make me the sister who filmed everyone. The craving to burn her down and the need to be seen clearly were 2 different things, and I was old enough finally to tell them apart. So I did the precise thing, the thing my whole career had trained me for. I preserved the footage properly, original files, unedited, with the metadata intact, backed up in 3 places, because a record you've tampered with is worse than no record at all. I had a lawyer verify the chain of it, and then, instead of a public detonation, I called my father, and I asked him to come to my house, alone, because there was something he needed to see, and I would not do it in front of an audience, because unlike my sister, I was not going to use our mother's death as a stage. My father came. He sat on my couch with his arms crossed, braced, a man about to watch his guilty daughter make excuses. And I did not make excuses. I did not say a word about Renata. I just turned my laptop toward him and I played the footage. Me and Mama, at the table, month after month, paying bills together. Her voice, her hand on my arm. And then, without comment, I played the other footage. Renata at the computer. The dates. The dollar amounts. Mama's voice from the other room. "Is that you, Mija? Just tidying up your accounts, Mama. Go rest." My father is not a young man, and he did not take it well, and I am not going to describe his face, because some things a daughter keeps. But I will tell you that when it was over he was quiet for a very long time, and then he said, "You could have shown this to everyone. At the hall. You could have shown them all." And I said, "I know." And he said, "Why didn't you?" And I said, "Because you're my father, and I wasn't going to make you watch your daughter be a thief in a room full of people." Either daughter. That was the moment my father started coming back to me. Not all at once, but that was the moment. Here is where the story becomes not about a lie, but about a choice, and it is not the choice my family expected, and it is probably not the one you'd expect either, because I had had it all. I could have gone to the police. What Renata did was not a family squabble. It was theft from a vulnerable adult, elder financial abuse, a real crime with real consequences, and I had it on time-stamped video with a verified chain of custody. My sister could have been arrested. Given what she'd tried to do to me on top of it, given the false accusation she'd made in front of 40 people, there was a version of this where Renata's whole life came apart in a courtroom, and where I got to watch, and where it would have been entirely just. I thought about it. On the bad nights I thought about it a great deal, but I kept coming back to the same place. My mother had just died. My father had just lost his wife, and putting Renata in a courtroom would not unrob our mother, and it would not give me back the 8 months I'd spent as her caretaker, and it would, above all, put my grieving father through the public destruction of his other daughter, weeks after he buried his wife. The consequence Renata deserved and the consequence my father could survive were two different things, and I decided that on this one, I would let my father's grief set the ceiling, not my sister's crime. So I chose accountability without annihilation, which is a harder and lonelier road than either forgiveness or ruin. I brought Renata to my father's house, just the three of us. No 40 relatives, no church hall, no audience for her to perform to. And I played the footage again, for her this time, with our father in the room, and I watched my sister's face do the thing I will remember for the rest of my life. Watched the performance fall away, because there is no performing your way out of your own voice on a recording saying, just tidying up your accounts, mama, go rest. She tried, at first. She said the footage was out of context, that she'd been helping too, that I'd edited it. And I said, calmly, that the files were original and verified, and that I was very good at exactly this, and that she knew I was, and that this was the one arena in the world where the cable girl could not be beaten. And she stopped, because it was true. And then I gave her the terms, in front of our father, and I read them out so there could be no confusion later. 1. The $31,000 is returned in full to our father, who is now the executor of Mama's estate, on a schedule, secured, in writing. 2. Renata tells the family the truth, not a vague misunderstanding. She tells the same 40 people who watched me walk out of that hall that she took the money, that I took nothing, and that she let them all believe a lie. In writing, to everyone, in her own words. 3. Never again, for the rest of our lives, does she tell a single soul that I stole from our mother. That accusation dies now, permanently, in this room. And in exchange, I do not take the recording to the police, not because she deserves that mercy, because our father does. There was no item 4. I did not ask for an apology, because I had finally learned that an apology you have to extract with evidence is not worth the breath it costs. She took the terms. She had no other option. The alternative was a courtroom and the footage, and she knew it. She returned the money to our father over the following year, and she sent the letter to the family, the hardest currency she'd ever had to pay, admitting in her own words what she'd done and what I hadn't. I'd love to tell you the family instantly rushed to apologize. They didn't. That's the part these stories never show. Some of them were embarrassed, and embarrassment makes people awkward and avoidant rather than contrite. A few called, stiff and uncomfortable, to say they were sorry they'd jumped to conclusions. An aunt sent a card. It was not the tearful vindication you'd want. It was quieter and more disappointing than that, because the truth is that the people who are quick to believe the worst about you are rarely graceful about being proven wrong. I had to make my peace with a vindication that arrived as a mumble instead of a symphony. But my father was different. The 18 months after that were not dramatic. That's the part these stories never show. Renata and I are not close, and I don't think we ever will be again, and I've stopped pretending that's a tragedy I need to fix. We are civil at the 2 or 3 family events a year we both attend. She is quieter now, diminished in a way that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the fact that a person who built her whole self on being adored cannot fully recover from a room full of relatives learning what she really did. That is not a punishment I inflicted. It is just the natural weight of the truth finally sitting where it belonged. My father and I are closer than we have ever been. He comes to my house for dinner every couple of weeks now. He asks about my work, actually asks real questions, the way you ask about something you've decided to respect. Once, watching me check a client's camera feed on my laptop, he said, quietly, you keep everybody safe. You kept your mother safe. I should have known it was you keeping the record, not you breaking the trust. It wasn't a grand speech, but it was my father finally seeing the thing I actually am, and I decided to let it be enough, because he is old and grieving, and I am tired of waiting for cleaner sentences than people can make. He also told me something I keep close. He told me that in the weeks after the funeral, before I showed him the footage, he had lain awake trying to reconcile the daughter he thought had robbed her mother with the daughter who'd spent 8 months keeping that same mother safe, and that the two didn't fit, and that he'd been too grief-stupid and too swayed by Renata's tears to trust the version of me he actually knew. I let her tears drown out 35 years of you, he said. I'm ashamed of that. He didn't ask me to forgive him. That's the only reason it landed. It was the first thing anyone in my family had ever said to me that didn't have an instruction folded inside it. People ask me whether it was revenge. I didn't steal steal anything. I didn't rob a dying woman, or blame my sister for it, or stand up in a church hall and destroy someone's name in front of 40 grieving people. I didn't do a single one of the things that made the consequences arrive. Renata did all of that, in the quiet, while our mother was too confused to know she was being robbed by the daughter telling her to go rest. All I did was keep a record. That's my whole job. I keep the record that has no stake in the outcome, the thing that holds up when everyone's version collides. I installed that system to catch a fall. It caught the truth instead, and when the truth was finally in my hands, I refused to use it as a weapon, and used it only as a record, which is the difference between revenge and justice, and I have learned that the difference is everything. Here is what everybody lost. Renata lost the story, the one where she was the adored one, the special one, the center of every room, whose word the family took without checking. She lost it not because I attacked her but because the record existed, and the record didn't care how charming she was. My family lost the comfortable version of me, the quiet, reliable one they never had to actually look at. Some of them are still uncomfortable that the sister they were so quick to condemn turned out to be the honest one all along. That discomfort is theirs to sit with, not mine to soothe. And I lost something too, and it wasn't Renata. I lost the belief that if I was reliable enough, and quiet enough, and handled enough of the boring necessary things without complaint, my family would know me well enough to never believe I was a thief. I found out, on the day of my mother's funeral, that 35 years of being trustworthy bought me exactly nothing the moment my sister cried prettily enough. That belief cost me more than the accusation did, but here is what I gained, and it's the thing I hold on to. My mother, in her last frightened months, asked the reliable daughter to keep her safe. And I did, and in doing it, I accidentally kept the one thing that would clear my name and lay the truth bare, not because I planned it, but because keeping the honest record is simply who I am, in a family that spent 35 years finding that quality too dull to notice. The very thing they overlooked me for turned out to be the thing that saved me. Something small happened a few months after the letter went out, and it mattered more than the letter did. The cousin who'd written "How could you" showed up at my door one evening, awkward and unable to look at me, and stood on the step and said he'd been carrying it around and needed to say it in person, that he was sorry, that he'd known me my whole life and believed a lie about me in an afternoon, and that he didn't understand how he'd done that so easily. I didn't make it comfortable for him, but I let him say it, and after he left I sat with the fact that the apology I'd wanted most hadn't come from Renata at all. It had come from the people who believed her, and it was their belief, not her theft, that had done the deepest cutting. I keep a copy of that footage in 3 secure places, and I will keep it for the rest of my life, and I hope I never need it again. Not the funeral photos, the footage, because the footage is the thing that was actually true. My family could believe a pretty lie over a quiet daughter. They could not, in the end, argue with a timestamp. When I remember that church hall now, I don't remember Renata's tears first, or my father's terrible stranger's stare. I remember setting down a paper cup of cold coffee and saying, "I'll prove it isn't true," and then going home and doing the one thing I have always known how to do, which is find the truth in a record that no one else thought to keep. They decided the quiet one was the thief. It turned out the quiet one was the only person in the whole family who'd kept an honest account of what actually happened. So if there's someone in your life who's decided who you are without ever really looking, who'd believe a pretty lie over everything they should know about you, ask yourself one thing tonight. Do they actually know you? Or have they just decided you're the safe one to blame because you've never made them look closely enough to see they were wrong? Thank you for staying with this story to the end. Every character and event in it is fictional, written for reflection and entertainment. But if any of it felt familiar, I hope it leaves you with this: keep your own record, not out of paranoia, and not to catch anyone, just because the truth is worth having a copy of, in a world where the people who should know you best will sometimes believe the person who cries the prettiest. Memory fades and people lie, but a thing recorded honestly, at the time, by something with no stake in the outcome, that holds. Sometimes it's the only thing that does.